Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is your host, Kyle Buller. Today on the show, I get to chat with Ryan Zurrer, one of the founders over at Vine Ventures. And this was a fun interview. We were able to do this in person. We were both in New York City for the Horizons conference. And if you were at the conference, I hope you had a wonderful weekend there and got to see some really great talks and connect with everybody. And I'm a little bummed that I was only there for part of the time on Saturday. I really came in pretty late, met up with Ryan, and then was able to attend a talk or two and kind of just hung out in the hallways and outside catching up with people. So if you didn't catch me this time, hopefully in the future at another psychedelic conference. So Ryan Zurrer is the founder and managing director of Vine Ventures, an early-stage venture fund focused on psychedelics, and he's also the co-founder and director of Dialectic, a family office with a focus on alternative asset management. And Ryan has consistently delivered extraordinary returns through a decade in venture. And previously, he held senior roles in deploying utility-scale renewables globally. And so in this episode, we really chat about the recent news that MAPS released with this funding coming from Vine Ventures. So MAPS, I believe, is receiving around $70 million from Vine Ventures through what's called the Regenerative Financing Vine, which is a special purpose vehicle, an SPV. And so it's helping to raise the capital to purchase the rights to the revenue share. And in return for the $70 million, the SPV receives 6.1% of the North American MDMA revenue for 8 years following the initial drug sales. And there's also some reciprocity that comes with the SPV. It comes with a reciprocity payment mechanism. So after paying back the principal, the SPV returns 50% of the revenue share back to MAPS. And after hitting a 3 times payback, the SPV returns 50% of the revenue shares back to MAPS. So that sounds really, really exciting. So yeah, in this episode, we just chat about what's going on with this funding for MAPS and MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, a little bit about Vine Ventures. And we also hear some other kind of special news revolving around MAPS and Vine Ventures around the blockchain industry there. So you'll learn more about that in this episode. So really exciting. Really, really awesome time chatting with Ryan. So Ryan, thank you for your time. And really wish we kind of also got to chat a little bit more about crypto, blockchain, and NFTs and the merging, maybe where that whole field intersects with psychedelics. So hopefully we'll be able to have Ryan back on in the future to chat more about it. I'm sure, the blockchain and crypto space has really been taking off in the past few years. And I know I have lots of questions and would love to hear more about that. Awesome. So that's it for the intro. If you love what we're doing over here at Psychedelics Today, ways that you can support us is definitely by subscribing to the podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're feeling called to it, if you're on iTunes, Apple, help to leave a review over there. That helps us out a whole bunch. And then we also have a Patreon. If you want to leave a small monthly donation that helps to keep the lights on over here and help us produce this show, you can do so at patreon.com/psychedelics today. And then let's see, some announcements. So we will be having our Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists course kick off January 6th. That is a Thursday. We have 2 time slots there. One group starts at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and the other one starts at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And so this is a nice hybrid course. It's 9 weeks long. You get tons of pre-recorded material, interviews, lectures, etc. And then you get to meet online for an hour and a half on Zoom for Q&A, for a little bit more presentation, and to really dive in and have nuanced discussions around the course content. So really, it's the classroom time to dig in. And so if you want to join us, you can do so at psychedeliciceducationcenter.com and check out Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists. And I guess just a little bit of a reminder, when you do go to psychedeliciceducationcenter.com or Psychedelics Today, you can find your way over there through Psychedelics Today. When you see our classes, you might see 2 options there. There's an independent learner class, so it's called Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists, independent learner. And then there's also the live sessions. So you'd want to check out the live sessions. There's the dates and times up there. The independent learner one is a go at your own pace. So if you feel like you can't make the classroom time, you can still sign up anytime, and you can get all the course content with that independent learner option. So again, check that out, psychedelicEducationCenter.com. All right, that's it. I hope everybody is having a beautiful week, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Ryan Zurrer. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today, I am joined with Ryan Zurrer, founder of Vine Ventures. We're here in New York at Horizons. Welcome to the show, Ryan. Excited to have you here.
Thanks very much for having me on, Kyle. And as I just mentioned, I want to thank you for all the work that you do with Psychedelics Today. It was the first publication that went into a curated list of mine of my favorite publications in the space, and remains the publication that I go back to the most for just rational thought around the development of the space overall and specifically the science. So I'm very grateful for the work that you do in this space.
Thank you. It's very humbling. I really appreciate the support there. We want to keep the intro short. We were just kind of talking about how, intros can get long-winded. So can you give a brief intro of some of your work, who you are, how you got into this psychedelic space?
Sure. I have been a venture capitalist for a little over a decade now. Before that, had a career in renewables, and was fortunate enough to meet my wife at her ayahuasca center in Peru a number of years ago, and been able to accompany enough of her ceremonies over the years to conduct a very informal but empirical study that very clearly something special is happening here when people take a thoughtful and intention-filled approach to psychedelic therapies, both for curing the sick and betterment of the well. So I started poking around the space in 2018, going to conferences and talking with people. And I made two observations. One was that a lot of the best work that had been done in the space to bring us to this point had been led by nonprofit institutions. MAPS, obviously first and foremost, but then USONA and Imperial College of London and others. The second observation that I made was that there was a very strong aversion to for-profit capital in the space. I noticed when I say that I'm a venture capitalist, people would immediately put up a shield and be very standoffish. So what we wanted to do with Vine is design something that demonstrated to everybody that we're really here for the right reasons. And that led to the Vine Reciprocity Pledge, where we give half of GP carry back to nonprofit initiatives in the space. It's not a portion of proceeds or
what's GP carry?
So GP carry is the profits that the fund managers make in execution of the fund. And so that was an important point. And then the what of what we were funding also, we wanted to be very, very different. I think we're the only fund in the space that holds the view that naturals will represent a meaningful part of the demand profile over time. And we've got a very big challenge ahead of us in dealing with the demand on natural stocks in the space. Iboga is now an endangered species, and there's anecdotal evidence of dwindling stocks around the Cappy vine.
Yeah, and then we have peyote and the toad and
many things. But further to that, we think that a lot of the drug development patents that represent a lot of the capital that has been deployed in the space are running after either molecules that have existed naturally for thousands of years, or patents that were issued in the 70s and expired in the 90s. And so we're very much of the belief that generics will dominate the space very quickly, and then value will accrue down the supply chain much more, in a much more balanced fashion than all of the value accruing to the long arm of a restricted drug development patent. So we take this very contrarian view of the space, and that came about because the vision that I was being described by early investors and entrepreneurs in kind of the capital side of the space was one of, restrictive drug development patents, that everything would be 100% synthetics, that it would all be MD controlled, MD administered in kind of a white lab setting. And that really sounded like dystopian future to me. So Vine became a vehicle of necessity rather than any kind of desire there, and so we set out to raise a fund, which I led personally, but was fortunate enough to have support from a number of different investors who saw the same vision that I saw and set out to invest in this very contrarian thesis in the space, and that's how Vine Ventures has come to be.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I want to go back to something that you said just around like the image, or I guess maybe like the stereotype of like a venture capitalist. You said put up the shield. And then, I feel like in this budding psychedelic area, I feel like that is kind of like a thing, right? People are like very grassroots.
Rightfully so.
They've been around for a while. Lots of money are coming in. I don't know if you were in Miami or not, but that was definitely a much different scene than it is here at Horizons.
Sure.
And so I guess like, what would you say to the folks that, maybe have been around for a while, a little skeptical of, the capital that's coming in, or the people that are in like the VC world? Any advice, or how would you want to approach that?
Yeah, I would say that markets are leading indicators. And so the natural ebb and flow of a market is that sometimes capital and market dynamics will outstrip the practical or scientific realities of space. So the fact that we've had this sort of run up and now a bit of a drawdown in capital markets around psychedelics is actually just the natural process that this type of market goes through. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. A lot of this capital will wash out and, find new avenues over time. Certainly as a Canadian, I've been somewhat dismayed at the rush to public markets of immature psychedelic companies, often with, again, dubious plans around drug development and patents and things like that. I do make the observation that there is a bit of a bifurcation in the space between, say, what one would call soulless capital and capitalists, and sort of a well-intentioned but somewhat hippie woo-woo class that doesn't maybe have the execution to deliver something at scale. And there's a very large chasm that very few folks operate within, that kind of midpoint of being here for the right reasons, but then also being professional and pragmatic about wanting to scale this because it means getting therapies into the hands of millions of people around the world, both for curing the sick and eventually for betterment of the well. So I don't get too worried about what other people are doing myself, and I would encourage other people not to get too worried about these fly-by-night capitalists that won't have staying power in the space. It is positive overall that that capital comes into the space to fund new experiments, because some subset of those experiments will go on to be, incredibly valuable companies and organizations that do great things. So don't sort of, lose sight of the forest for the trees here, and just remind oneself that a subset of this capital will actually be very productive over time.
Yeah. And I guess like, what's your take on decriminalization? I feel like there's, on the one camp, decriminalization, I think some people get worried about this idea of commodifying the sacred and spiritual traditions and, those indigenous lineages, where I think some folks in the decrim camps are thinking like, let's go back to the roots. We can share, we can create our own type of markets there, more natural products. But again, I guess decriminalization doesn't always mean legalization. Would those markets really succeed? But yeah, you're mentioning scalability. We're always kind of trying to find this middle ground here at Psychedelics Today, saying we need some of the research, if we really believe in these medications, to bring it to market for therapies, being able to scale this and make it accessible is important. But yeah, on the other hand, this idea of maybe commodifying the sacred, I guess like what's your take on that?
So there's a bunch to unpack there.
Yeah.
Our position for the record is very pro decriminalization and pro liberalization over time. and how does liberalization look like. You'll notice I didn't call that legalization, but liberalization will unfold in different markets in different ways. And maybe that's under licensure, or maybe that's under religious exemptions, which is actually something that I don't think is being talked about enough and studied enough, but should be. And maybe over time and for certain molecules, we will see a legalization. Yeah. I'm actually very firmly of the belief that one of, if not more, of what I call the cacao markets, we fondly refer to internally.
Not talking about the chocolate, right?
No. So it's Canada, California, Colorado, and Oregon. One of the core theses that we started with is that these will be the primary markets that will pursue liberalization of psychedelics. And they will look different in different markets, but the allegory of cannabis applies, where eventually it will tend towards some kind of regulated, liberalized market, where you can have legal access. I think that is fine. When we talk about the caveat of, well, what about the sort of sacred reverence for these plant medicines? There is the challenge that we have to face of how much we're affecting the natural supplies of, whether it's Cambo, the frog, or iboga, the African tree root that is now endangered, peyote, ayahuasca, what have you, because inevitably the naturals will represent an expressive part of the demand profile of the space over time, whether that's in therapeutic setting or legalized recreation setting. But I would argue that we as a society will arc towards the values and traditions of our indigenous forefathers more if we're able to experience these medicines than if we're not. Yeah. I think you'll build empathy, you'll build greater understanding, you'll build bridges of respect and deference towards indigenous communities, and then you'll find that they will also have a path to sort of be one with modern society and contribute and benefit from their contributions in that way. So I look at it as very positive for indigenous communities. Some of the philanthropic work that we do is giving funds to indigenous Shipibo communities in Peru, and a lot of the ayahuasca centers, whether it was my wife's early on or others, contribute really, really significantly to those communities. Yeah. Yes, there are imperfections. Yes, there are one-off examples of things gone awry, but generally speaking, we will not improve the lot of indigenous communities by further isolating them. Right. By giving them a path to share their knowledge and wisdom with the world and benefit from that, I find to be a much more inspiring future that I would like to be in.
Totally, yeah. And I guess you hear some of those stories of, a lot of the younger generations maybe are leaving those tribes or, leaving those traditions, wanting to go to the city. And then that also gives them an avenue to maybe, learn more about their heritage and their lineage and plant medicines, or maybe bringing some infrastructure to those communities, water and stuff like that. Has your, views of, say, the VC world, money, changed a little bit when you started to get more involved in psychedelics? Just thinking about your own personal experiences, and you were just kind of referring to people having more of their own experiences, and maybe that's kind of helping them understand how to show up a little bit differently.
Well, I think not to talk too much about myself, but I think my experience is one that is shared by many, where you'll leave your first set of plant medicine therapies, whether it's a retreat center or otherwise, with certainly a deeper sense of compassion. Yeah. And often a deeper sense of mission to share this with the world. And so I think I myself, like you and many others, probably took those two important values away from these experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting to kind of, incorporate some of those beliefs or those insights of having, as we're, creating this ecosystem and building a business and seeing how things are operating, challenging, like, okay, how am I trying to find balance here, right? Yeah. It's a really interesting journey.
But that's also informed the ethic that I have of not worrying too much about what other people are doing.
Right.
They're all just trying to make their way in the world and find their path. And generally, I would say most people, whether it's capitalists or otherwise, are mostly trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a hit and sometimes that's a miss. And you just sort of wake up every day and understand that you make a very small part of all of this. And so, you try to just do the right thing yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, the mission at Vine Ventures and what you guys are up to.
So, we're an early stage venture fund. We often invest in novel companies that are starting out. In fact, we prefer to sort of be the first money in the door. And as we've looked at this space, we've sort of created this taxonomy or spectrum of the value chain that sort of starts upstream at drug development and kind of moves further down into generics, and then that moves further down into API and GMP manufacturing, and then you kind of move further downstream into the interaction with the client. And so that can be, in-city clinics, it can be digital platforms, it can be psychedelic tourism, and things like that. So where we try to be different is that we take a broad view of this entire space. We do a lot of data analytics, and so we've observed that almost 95% of the $14 billion that has been deployed in venture capital in the space has gone to drug development.
Yeah.
And that's really nice because it leaves very green pastures for us further down the value chain. So I think we're certainly the largest investor in GMP and API manufacturing. And we're able to.
Could you describe those terms for those that may not know what GMP and API mean?
So GMP and API manufacturing, just consider like good manufacturing practices manufacturing. So the idea here is that you have to hit a consistent level of quality.
Yeah.
And we've had this problem, say, with cannabis, with like edibles, where in psychedelics, it's much more of a pronounced issue where you can't miss dose by 10%, right? That could be fundamentally different experience for somebody. And so these good manufacturing practices are just a way to hit consistent quality every single time. That is kind of like that pharma grade,
right?
So to speak.
Cool. Thanks for that.
But anyway, so we invest in downstream experiments as well. Very proud of an investment in a VR company called Trip, led by Nanea Reeves, who's just an extraordinary entrepreneur. And that's really interesting both for research context. So you can give a patient a psychedelic-like experience so that they have a better idea of what to expect during their psychedelic experience. You can also help them with integration. And there are many other things in this broad category of conscious health and wellness. And that's sort of the general category that we invest in. Psychedelics is a huge, huge part of that. But we look at this as a broader category that we refer to as conscious health and wellness that includes, biohacking and quantified self and other modalities of health and wellness. We've invested in a really amazing breathwork experience community called Othership.
That's with Robbie Bent, right?
That's Robbie Bent. Yes, the great Robbie Bent. And Othership takes kind of a lot of the lessons learned from SoulCycle and community building from, say, like CrossFit, and creates this experience that spans both digital and in local, so that you can have connection with community around your own mental health journey. Whether it's you need to stop and meditate or do a breath work, or whether you need to connect with people so that you can stay on your path. There's really interesting experiments happening through Othership in that regard, and we're excited about where they're going. Incidentally, I am consciously optimistic that Othership could be a bigger community than both SoulCycle and CrossFit combined.
Yeah. They're really focused on breath work and like ice plunges or cold plunges and stuff like that,
it's a mixture of modalities. And so breath work, holotropic breath work, mixing with hot cold therapies, and the feeling that you have coming out of these group sessions is just fantastic, right? Mixing these modalities for people and then adding in a layer of community and a layer of introspective questioning is allowing people to just develop at a really rapid rate. And what I've observed about it, and is why we absolutely demanded to be let into the investment round, is that the community there is not just a group of passionate, like-minded people. This has become somewhat religious for them.
Right.
This is something very deep and spiritual for them, and they take very, very seriously, whether they're doing it at home using the app, or whether they're in the Othership studio in Toronto. And I'm hopeful that we'll see other Othership studios in Austin and LA and many other places around continental North America in the not too distant future. But having that bridge between a digital at-home experience and a community in local, and not sort of trying to be one or the other, but recognize that it is both, that we have both digital identities and real world identities that we need to reconcile with, I think is kind of the aha moment of sort of the religion of Othership.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. It makes me just think about like this whole concept around integration and just thinking about years ago when I got involved, there weren't any places like this to go to, right? And it's like when you're trying to come back after really profound experiences, to be able to go to a studio that offers a lot of these, experiential techniques, the community, I think that solves a huge piece at times too, when you're able to really scale that and bring that to a lot of different people. But yeah, that idea around our digital lives and our real life, really interesting.
Yep. And sense of community across those two identities, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think you said in the beginning that some of the, what was the term? Carry. Yep, carry. You're going to start to give that back to certain groups within Vine?
Yep. So some of the projects that we've already undertaken. Now note that the carried interest in a fund typically comes in like year 5 to 8. But fortunately, we've done fairly well on some investments, and we've already started to throw off cash that can go towards nonprofit initiatives. So, we give every year to MAPS and to USONA, we've given to Imperial College of London. But a project that I'm really excited about and quite proud of for our team is what we call the Knowledge Preservation Project. And this started out as the Juan Ruiz Knowledge Preservation Project. Juan Ruiz is a very famous shaman who is a classically trained botanist from Peru. And this is in connection with the McKenna Foundation and our good friend and advisor, Dennis McKenna. And so there's a very famous saying that when a shaman dies, a library is burned down. And in the case of the great Juan Ruiz, not only a library of shamanic wisdom and lessons would be burned down, but also many botany libraries would be burned down. So we found it very important, especially considering the risks and how difficult COVID has been for Peru, to start to just record his wisdom. And so the Knowledge Preservation Project started with Juan Ruiz and sat down with him and recorded hundreds, if not maybe into the thousands of hours of interviews with him and nature walks with him, and just trying to synthesize this wonderful breadth and depth of knowledge that he has. But then our hope is that will be a first step towards recording and, more importantly, cataloging or categorizing a lot of knowledge from a lot of very important shamans in the jungles. And so that's the type of project that I think we'll probably continue to fund. I should note that the Vine Reciprocity Pledge is a nonprofit entity that is controlled, that the actual capital deployment is controlled by our portfolio entrepreneurs, not by me. So
what does that mean?
Yeah, so what that means is that at the end of, sort of at the end of fund life, we put our portfolio entrepreneurs around the table, guys like Robbie from Othership, or Danny from Cygen, or Nanea from Trip, and they decide where this capital goes. I don't decide where this capital goes. That was a really
so it's like more democratic there.
Well, not democratic, because it will be weighted by contribution. So the most successful entrepreneur in the portfolio will have the strongest vote on where that goes. And this became I was very, very surprised at how much the Reciprocity pledge has mattered for entrepreneurs in the space. We're constantly getting invited to participate in rounds that, had already closed many months ago, or we didn't expect to be in. And the feedback that we get from entrepreneurs is that it's because of this Reciprocity pledge that they want to know that a part of the proceeds of the value that they create will go back to nonprofit initiatives in the space. B, they want to work with somebody who cares more about, than just about making money on the face of it. And C, and this is kind of interesting, and we didn't really expect this when we started, many, many entrepreneurs actually have designs on being capital allocators themselves. So they look at this as a first opportunity to sort of be a venture capitalist or be a philanthropist, because that's something that they want to be in the trajectory of their career anyways. And so we've been, very grateful and frankly overwhelmed with just how important entrepreneurs considered the Reciprocity pledge to be. So much so that now we can't really separate Vine from the Reciprocity pledge. They're kind of the like same thing. Yeah, it's like if we're to go on or do a Fund 2 or Fund 3 or any other vehicle, we're socially contracted at this point to have reciprocity baked in to everything that we do. And that really is what led us to be selected by MAPS and to work with MAPS on creating a financing vehicle that made sense for them.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit? I just saw an announcement that you guys just partnered up, and love to hear more about it.
Yeah, so this week we are here announcing the Regenerative Financing Vine. This is a $70 million SPV vehicle.
What's an SPV?
So a special project vehicle that will go into MAPS PBC, and then we'll share in part of the revenues over the course of 8 years after the start of commercialization, and then has a sunset. So it's not equity, it's not an investment in MAPS, and it's not a loan. You share in the revenues, thus sharing in the potential upsides of the company, but then you have a sunset to this vehicle.
And what's a sunset?
So it ends after 8 years.
Okay.
So you get 8 years of revenue, and then in the 9th year, you don't get any more. So that changes the return profile of what this looks like. And we designed it in that way. MAPS came to us. I'm very grateful for the lunches and conversations that I've had over the years with Leanna and with Fede from MAPS. And when we started talking about this more specifically, and they had been doing some modeling with BCG about how the revenue should look over the course of the next decade, we came to the conclusion that you could design this rev share, and it looks somewhat similar to venture debt, or what Steve Jurvetson very poignantly highlighted yesterday, almost like project finance. So it shares in 6.1% of the revenues of MAPS PBC over the course of 8 years, deploying MDMA therapy and related activities in continental North America, North America, including Hawaii. And then the return profile looks, again, more like venture debt, so north of 20% IRR. That's on a modeled baseline case. Now, because there's a revenue share, and you can share in the upside as other things come online, there's lots of bullets in the chamber to take shots at real outlier, true venture equity-like returns. So, other indications could come online, like chronic pain or depression or anorexia. And actually, we think that many of these indications will come online very, very quickly. Other geographies can come online. I actually think that Canada will be the first major country to liberalize access to psychedelic therapies. And so I think that will be a really important market. But we very conservatively modeled out a baseline case of approximately 500,000 patients a year, mostly around PTSD to start for the first 5 years. And that gave us that baseline of north of 20% IRR. We also added in an inflation adjustment backstop so that investors get at least their money back plus inflation, or 8%, whichever is higher. I wanted to put that in because I have very significant concerns around US dollar inflation over the next kind of 5 to 8 years. And so I wanted this to be an inflation indexed vehicle for my own capital. But so within this structure, we've designed a reciprocity pledge, which kind of Vine has to do at this point. So at 100% return to the investors, you start giving 15% of contribution back to MAPS, the organization. And at 300% return to the investors, you start giving 50% back to MAPS, the nonprofit. And so you have this vehicle where you participate in the return profile as new things come online and MAPS outperforms, but you sort of shave off the top rather than capping it. I think the idea of like capped returns is very...
What's a capped return?
So to somebody, a lot of companies in the space that are trying to imbue reciprocity into their business model will offer investors a capped return. So at, like 3x, you don't get anything.
Right.
I think that model lacks elegance. It's not very inspiring to investors to think about a future outcome in which the company could become enormously successful and you have funded that success, but you don't participate in it. So I like the idea of shaving it off with reciprocity, but not hard capping it.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah. And that's, and so that's what we put in here. And fortunately the feedback from investors has been very positive. And this is how it should be, right? That if these other indications come online or other geographies come online, or maybe I shouldn't say this, but as a venture capitalist, I have the luxury of thinking open-mindedly about the future. And again, this is not MAP saying this, maybe something off-label comes online. There's really amazing outlier returns that should at least somewhat accrue to the people who fund this, right? But you can bake reciprocity into the mechanism so that you don't have this purely exponential venture equity return. And so that's what we've designed, and it achieves the goal of allowing MAPS to get out in front of the industry first, to utilize this first mover advantage that they have established for themselves over this long 35-year period.
They've been working on it forever.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Yeah. It gives them the capital to scale, but most importantly to me, I'm really here first and foremost about the social experiment. What happens when a nonprofit institution is the leader of a emerging pharmaceuticals industry? Their MAPS is going to be able to set a commercial and cultural bar for access that will allow millions of more people to gain access to psychedelic therapies that they need, which is literally life-saving. But then also for those of us who participate in the industry, it will set the standard which will allow for more value share across that taxonomy or that spectrum or value chain that I described earlier, rather than all of the value accruing to the long arm of a restricted drug development patent. Putting MAPS out in front first will allow 1,000 entrepreneurial flowers to bloom over the next decade in the long shadow of a drug patent. And I think that that's really inspiring for investors who want to continue to support this space. I think it's really inspiring for entrepreneurs who now have an avenue to carve out value in the space for their in-city clinic in a city that is not, New York or LA, or try something new that they couldn't. Now there will be more value available because a pharmaceutical company isn't hoovering up all the value in the space. So this sets a really important precedent that first and foremost allows for maximum patient access,
right.
and secondly will allow for maximum entrepreneurial design space over the next decade.
Super fascinating. I'm really excited about this. I mean, it sounds like it is going to bring a lot of value to the space. I'm wondering, like the difference here between maybe these for-profit type of entities, pharmaceutical companies, versus the nonprofit, and some thoughts there, like what MAPS is doing, say, versus like what Compass is doing. And I think we've heard those ridiculous kind of patent things.
Exactly, like that. Those conversations with Compass, or people around the Compass ecosystem, were kind of the call to arms a number of years ago for me to be like, this is just not a future I want to live in.
Yeah.
Right. And this is the great thing, right? A pharmaceutical company cannot come in to this space and charge $20,000 a dose for, say, psilocybin if MAPS is charging $2,000 a dose for MDMA therapy, right?
Right.
They will be considered by ratepayers as economic substitutes. You and I, as psychonauts, may not consider an MDMA experience and a psilocybin experience to be a substitute of one another, but for insurance ratepayers, they're considered economic substitutes of one another. So that commercial and cultural bar that MAPS sets right now, I think is incredibly important. And then it's really just inspiring to have a conversation with people at MAPS where it's not about how much can we price this to maximize, gross contributions. It's how can we most intelligently price this to take advantage of the gross margin that ratepayers may provide in the American, healthcare system, but concurrently offer subsidized patient access for people who have fallen through the cracks of the American ratepayer system, and create this organization that is designed for maximum patient access rather than maximum profit.
Which is huge, because that seems to be the big debate on how expensive psychedelic assisted therapy is going to be, and how do we make this accessible to everybody, especially those that do fall through the cracks and can't afford it.
Exactly. And I just think that this will be a very important moment. We only get one chance to do this right. And from there, the precedent gets set. And so that's why we feel a very deep sense of mission to deliver this money for MAPS in this moment, because it just means so much to all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just how much MAPS has just really set the ground for everybody. Just thinking, like, I wouldn't definitely be here if like Rick hasn't been. Yeah, none of us would be.
This event doesn't exist. This space doesn't exist. None of this exists without the vision, and more importantly, the stoic path and the mountain that Rick Doblin has climbed. Well, not only Rick, but Amy and Leanna and Chris and Joy and so many others. Very rarely in my career, or in a career of a venture capitalist, do you get to sit down with a group who is that mission driven, who is that inspiring to be around. Very frankly, it's really interesting. There's this strange thing that happens by being around the MAPS team. One, I find myself more emotional. Like I find myself brought to tears at just the magnitude of this mission, how amazing what they've done is, how many times they've said no to the easy payout, said no to the easy out of any kind, to continue to walk this path for us all. And then secondly, you find yourself constantly wanting to do more for them, right? You constantly find yourself asking yourself, how can I do more? So for example, in our case, very, very early on in the negotiation, we immediately removed any kind of remuneration, carried interest, promote, any kind of payment whatsoever for Vine. I just couldn't possibly bring myself to make money on a vehicle while I'm working with these inspiring people who are all there making less than they otherwise could.
Yeah.
Chris Lotlicker is a full toolbox CEO. He could be at the helm of any of the Silicon Valley giants and do a great job. He could be making, 7-figure salaries every single year. And here he is working just as hard, being just as talented a CEO, but doing it for the right reasons. And so we decided almost immediately that there was no way that we could possibly allow ourselves to make money on the regenerative financing vine. However, we structured the regenerative financing vine to be a financial vehicle that stands up on its own 2 feet. So even if someone doesn't feel as passionate about the MAPS vision and mission that as we do, or even if somebody isn't a psychedelics investor that will benefit for the next decade from the precedent that this sets, they can get excited about this vehicle because it stands up on its own financial merits. It's a good investment. Venture debt investors find this attractive. Venture investors find this attractive. Project finance investors find this attractive, independent of their own journey with psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. I'm looking at time, and I know there's a few other points that we wanted to hit. You were mentioning, and this may be, I don't know how much information you want to drop, but you're also doing another project with MAPS around possible an NFT drop.
Yes. So we will have a time and a place announcement on this probably early in the new year. But I spent a lot of time in cryptocurrencies and am really enjoying investing in this new emerging category of digital art now that we have a good way to represent digital scarcity. And so I reached out to a few friends in the space and asked them if they would be willing to contribute a piece of digital art to do a drop for MAPS, an auction in benefit of MAPS. And this is important because once we close the regenerative financing vine, we need to get back to fundraising for MAPS, the nonprofit. MAPS, the nonprofit, continues to do a lot of important work around decrim and legalization and policy and lobbying and all these other things. Like, its funding needs have not gone away.
Yeah.
And so I have been blown away, just overwhelmed by the number of digital artists that have reached out over the last number of weeks, as well as the number of companies that work in the NFT space that have reached out to lend a hand and either offer pieces or offer their services or just get involved in some way. And this should, in retrospect, this shouldn't be that surprising to any of us. Many of these digital artists, their art journey was informed by their psychedelics journey. And so there is a very deep connection that we see. I constantly am trying to create separation and mutual exclusivity between the two fields of my life or my life's two passions, psychedelics and crypto. But they constantly keep trying to jam each other again. There's just this
keep coming together.
Yeah, this undeniable crossover where very clearly there's something there. And so we're very excited about this upcoming NFT drop in favor of MAPS. We're optimistic that we'll be able to raise a decent amount of capital for MAPS in this way as well. And this is the thing, is that once you are in this community within MAPS, and that's actually a really important part of this, is that I've recognized that, hey, there is a massive community here that is very valuable.
Yeah.
What platforms were to the 2000s and networks were to the 2010s, communities will be to the 2020s in venture. So the most valuable organizations that will emerge in the 2020s will be ones that are the most valuable communities. And one of the important observations that I've made now, being kind of in the MAPS family very directly for some time, is that they have this incredibly passionate, large, and potentially very valuable community. And so how do we tap that community? How do we engage with them? How do we ensure that they feel like they're part of MAPS? And you know, I hear so many people talk about MAPS in terms of we and us and our community. And I find that really inspiring. And I think that we should give an outlet for people to be involved in that way.
And how do NFTs allow that for those that, like, you know, just think it's a piece of art and where's the value there? You know, how are you creating community with that? Yeah.
So some of the pieces will be additions that maybe give you rights to other things over time. Like maybe some of the additions can be, you know, also a ticket to enter a MAPS event or MAPS community function in sometime in the future. Some of the art will be available as additions so that people can can go on these shared experiences in virtual realms. You know, some of this art is
in like the metaverse,
mind blowing. Yeah, some of the metaverse art that were being sent and being presented is wild. Like, not only is this going to be a great thing because it's MAPS, but it's also like the leading digital artists on our planet are making overwhelming contributions. Like, they're putting out the best pieces that they have. So then you'll have shared experiences that you can share with the MAPS community or take part with the MAPS community. And I think there's a lot of design space there to continue to tap that MAPS community, because it's a very important resource that MAPS has. And in my view, I spend a lot of time trying to reason through what the value of a community can be. You know, MAPS has an incredibly valuable community given the passion that's involved here.
Yeah, I mean, I think about like just getting involved in this space early on and going to like those early conferences. And it did seem like everybody there was like kind of rallying behind MAPS. I know, you know, there's been critiques over the years and there's, you know, all sorts of different stuff that's been going on, but it seems like, you know, kind of like that core is really from MAPS. And then as like new energy comes in, it's almost like here's this kind of older kind of, you know, roots type of community versus, this newer stuff. And I feel like, MAPS has been at the core of it, especially for me. So how do we leverage that community aspect?
Yeah. So, I mean, with the NFT, we want to make sure that there's an opportunity for everybody to get involved, right? That it's not just priced out to millionaires buying, you know, very expensive one-of-one digital art, that there's a community element to it and that people can participate in a range of different ways. And so this is the first that we're talking about this publicly in any context, but we'll have sort of more formal announcements in the not too distant future.
Really exciting.
There's a lot to do right now for MAPS.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're behind it and helping them out, and, you know, being able to get this therapy accessible, hopefully in the future, fingers crossed. Hopefully it's a lot sooner than the FDA doesn't keep pushing back, or, you know, COVID putting, you know, pause on some of it. So.
Yeah. We definitely, you know, I think the world is coming to grips with the fact that we have also unleashed a mental health pandemic onto our society, which, not to take anything away from the devastating effects of COVID-19 pandemic, but I have been saying since the first day that I found out about this pandemic that the mental health crisis would probably kill more people in the end than the actual virus itself.
Yeah.
And
I don't think we're really going to understand the impact until we're totally out of it, right? I mean, there's some parts when I reflect on my own experience or like with my clients, it's like we're still in it. It's still affecting us in so many different ways. And it's not until later we're like, whoa, that had a huge psychological and emotional impact on us on so many different levels.
On a societal level, on a community level,
spiritual
on an individual level.
Yeah.
Spiritually for sure. And so we have to, as a society, get really serious in this moment about taking an alternative approach to mental health. You know, as a venture capitalist, I genuinely believe that when venture capital is applied correctly, it seeks to create great value from solving the world's biggest problems. I can think of no other problem on planet Earth than the mental health crisis that we've unleashed onto our society. And I come at that knowing the global warming problem very intuitively. I spent a decade in renewables, and spoiler alert, we've actually solved global warming. It's just a matter of deploying the technologies. Mental health, we have not solved. Very far from it. And maybe we have some of the technologies, but we actually need to evolve it quite a bit more. So I look at this as genuinely the single largest problem that our society faces, and not just North American society, but globally. 1 in 5 people globally suffered from mental health illness before the pandemic. We don't have the data on what it is today, but we know it at least doubled, right? And maybe it tripled, and we're talking about more than half of mankind that now suffers from some form of mental health ailment. I know of no family, I have not met a single family that has escaped the grips of mental health problems through the last 18 months. I know of
definitely not. Yeah. And I'm right there with you. I mean, being a therapist, definitely a little biased on, I see it every day, right? What are some challenges that you think, the psychedelic field is really going to face trying to bring these medicines to market, and just, I guess, mainstream adoption as well?
Yeah. One of the biggest challenges that I'm very concerned around is stigma that is driven from anecdotal stories. In fact, I have been looking for somebody to fund a study debunking many of the sort of scare tactic stories around psychedelics, that it can cause people to go into catatonic schizophrenia, or that,
crack your spinal cord and get flashbacks.
Yeah, exactly. Or people doing sort of terrible things in themselves. I think that there may be some stories in that context, but at the same time, they're far fewer than we believe. And I think they've probably been embellished by mainstream media quite a bit. And so I'm very concerned that we have, 1 or 2 sort of bad apple situations that occur in the first steps of deployment. And then that becomes the narrative rather than all the important life-saving therapies and personal growth that's happening. The media narrative is something that I think we need to be very cautious with.
Yeah, I agree. That's probably one of the main challenges, is really kind of continuing to fight and change that narrative, the stigma.
Because, I mean, for example, look at the amazing study that came out of Matthew Johnson's lab at Johns Hopkins with respect to smoking cessation, right? And when you look at the alternatives around smoking cessation,
terrible.
Some of the drugs leave you impotent, and and others are just terrible for your body, totally. And here we are with those completely approved and being taken around the country, whereas we're still kind of walking the path and trying to get psilocybin approved for addiction recovery. Even though the data is so shocking, the efficacy is an order of magnitude higher than everything else, that you're left wondering why some alphabet soup drug can be legal while this is not.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's pretty crazy. Thinking about the companies that you've invested in, just the areas of psychedelics, I guess, what excites you the most? And it may kind of be outside of what you've invested in.
So we really, and to your point of outside of what we've invested in, I've really, really wanted to invest in more naturals cultivation. Why is iboga only grown in Gabon? Why is ayahuasca only growing in certain areas of the jungle? And why does it prefer to grow mostly around hardwood trees, very sort of expensive fruit trees, and it kills the tree? Yeah. Why doesn't it grow on lattice? And why can't we scale the growth of this? Because inevitably, people will want the natural plant experiences. I've tried, pharmawaska in comparison to ayahuasca. And it's a very watered down experience in my view. And so that's an area that we've deployed a little bit of experimental capital, but we wish to do much, much more. And we just haven't found the entrepreneurs. And so anyone who's thinking about, should I become an entrepreneur in this space, this is an area of complete green pastures, which I think is going to surprise a lot of people. It is not going to be 100% synthetics. That seems ridiculous to me.
Yeah, no, not at all.
So that's one. And then the second thing that I think is really important, we spend as an industry, we're spending billions and billions of dollars a year. Like I said, it just passed 14 billion in total venture deployed, almost all in synthetic drug development to pass through the FDA process.
Yeah.
Why can't we take kind of $5 to $10 million and try a legal case to bring psychedelics through a religious exemption under the argument, and I think this is very legitimate, that there is a new unspoken religion that has emerged in the last 20 years among many of the young people of North America that includes people who subscribe to California Sober and biohackers and quantified self enthusiasts and, Burning Man folks, and even people who are just, ardent subscribers to the theories put forth by Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan. There's kind of this all these things that you would look for in a religion, a shared set of values, shared text, which those podcasts actually serve as, shared rituals, and sense of community in this group, which, by the way, counts in the tens of millions of people conservatively, right? And and psychedelics makes part of the ceremonial customs of this group. And why should we not be pursuing at a significant scale a legal case? Because again, we can do it for a small fraction of all of this risk capital that goes into drug development and FDA approval processes. And so I think that it's a worthwhile endeavor. I would certainly write a check to it. It's probably, like I said, maybe like $5 to $10 million to put together. And I think that if enough of us sit around a table and throw in a decent check, we can at least sort of pay to see the river unfold on this story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I don't know, I'm definitely interested in that avenue, Joe, as well. He did a whole kind of series on the religious freedom and psychedelics. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think that also hits the community aspect, right? And also accessibility, right? Not needing to spend, X amount of dollars in a therapy clinic and, going back to the community, how important, like one of my teachers always says, we're the descendants of very successful tribes. I think something, just reflecting on my own experience, COVID, very isolated. Mm-hmm. And what happens when we do become too isolated and we're not so connected to the community? And I think the one thing that's really come out of, all my work here in the psychedelic space is that focus on community. And, I think those institutions or organizations within the religious context kind of helps form that a little bit, even though I think most people are a little hesitant towards, those formal kind of institutions around religion. Maybe, where all the trauma is still there. But what does a new version look like?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing because a lot of us who subscribe to this have a certain aversion to just the name religion. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. We hear that and go, oh.
Yeah. And you immediately don't want to subscribe to that thing rather than do want to subscribe to the thing. Robbie's community and othership, sometimes they get on me for calling it a religion and saying you guys are religious about this thing.
Or it's a cult.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, because that's the thing is when a religion is not enough people, right? When it's hundreds or a few thousand and not millions, it's then referred to as a cult. And then that has also a negative social bias as well. But at the same time, it's very interesting that we find ourselves in almost this, all of the things that religion historically provided, a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and a sort of social safety net, a sense of something greater than yourself. all these things we seem to really want as a society and as individuals right now, but then have this great aversion to whatever would be classified as religion. And I'm like looking at it and saying, hey, like you guys are all kind of the same religion, right? You go to Burning Man, like these guys are in a religion of this like BlackRock Inc. thing. And that's fine, but don't tell them that, because they get quite angry if you call it that, right?
I bet. Yeah. All right. Well, I see that we're over an hour. These conversations always go by really quickly, and always so much to ask and so much to talk about. Anything that you feel that's like left unsaid, anything that you want to close with that we didn't touch on?
I mean, right now, like if my eyes are open and I'm awake, I'm working for MAPS, right? So if anybody is, we're going to close this fundraise relatively quickly. If anybody's interested in participating and they're, capitalized to do so, we're not taking small checks for the most part. It's kind of the domain of more professional investors. But if somebody is capitalized to participate in something like this and they want to reach out, they can actually just send an email to my team at hello@find.vc, or they can reach me on any number of social media platforms, Twitter or otherwise. And so that's really the focus right now. Sweet. And there's just this deep sense of mission with this. So fortunately we've been overwhelmed by the interest, and this is going to go fast, but we'd like to get as many values aligned investors in as possible.
Awesome. And what's the website for Vine Ventures as well?
Vine.vc.
Vine.vc. Awesome. Well, Ryan, this has been awesome. Thank you again so much for your time. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Kyle.
it.
I appreciate it.
And we'll catch everybody on the next episode. Thanks so much for listening. All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Ryan Zurrer from Vine Ventures. If you want to learn more about Vine Ventures, again, you can check them out at vine.vc. Yeah, and just really, really thankful for Ryan's time and sharing some of the news around what Vine is up to in supporting MAPS with their goal for making MDMA-assisted psychotherapy legal. I know MAPS has been just working at this for a very long time, and it does cost a lot of money to make drugs legal for therapeutic use. So yeah, thank you again. If you have any questions, comments, anything like that, feel free to email us at support@psychedelicstoday.com. And again, if you like what we're doing over here and want to support us, share a piece of content with a friend, like us on all of our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. It's an easy way to just reshare content, and then subscribe to us on any podcast platform that you listen to. So thank you again, everybody. I hope you have a beautiful week ahead, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Psychedelics Today.